satellite internet out here in the middle of nowhere. Just wanted to make sure the stream was going to stabilize, and it looks like it will. So hopefully that is the case. Anyway, today I'm pleased to welcome Ryan Cristian from the Last American Vagabond. For there, they travel the world, writing what the people need to know. So obviously, with our focus on nomadic lifestyles here, I was immediately intrigued. But after checking out the information, I certainly do recommend it, especially now that the incredible Whitney Webb is writing over there. She's got a great ongoing series that I will link in the show notes. But anyway, today, this episode was sparked by one of Ryan's daily podcasts or video reports from last week entitled "Coronavirus is being covered up and suppressed like the 1918 Spanish Kansas flu." So the plan for today is this. We'll hop in the time machine and head back a century. We'll cover other possible missing connections that I really haven't heard brought up from anywhere else. And to conclude, we'll talk about the war and foreign policy shenanigans that are taking place around the world, despite the ongoing pandemic. Because again, I hadn't heard really anyone else talking about that. So we'll get all the we'll get the scoop on that. And one final note: the way I have the show structured is that we'll cover the possible theory with the least assumptions / speculation first.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to getting into some good conversation about all the different theories, because everyone today is so focused in trying to fit all the information into what their one theory is and branch out and realize that maybe more than one thing, actually.
Right. Yeah, I'm right there with you. And as I had a live stream last night with a guy named Daryl Beck, talks about is that he builds his self-esteem not on being right, but about knowing the truth. And that's so being proven wrong, or finding out a new theory or information to discredit something is a good thing, not a bad thing. But I guess to begin, could you tell us a bit about the Last American Vagabond? When did you start that, and what you guys do over there?
Well, long story short, this started as kind of a passion project for me on the side. I'm a classically trained chef. I went to the Culinary Institute of America in Napa Valley. That's been my career for most of my life, until suddenly I had that kind of moment that we've all had over the years, where I woke up to the reality that we were being deceived in so many different ways. For me, that really started with cannabis in particular, but not just as it pertained to cannabis law reform and all the many, many deeply seated dark lies around that topic, but more so about how that topic related to so many other things in regard to just personal freedoms. And how we're realizing that, as we all saw with the cannabis thing, that if, states, even individuals, even actually come together across party lines, look at what we can accomplish. It's amazing to see how these states are just standing up today and saying, well, guess what? We don't agree with your federal law. Imagine that happening in any other circumstance today. It wouldn't fly. It just shows you that that's possible, in my opinion. And it kind of just blossomed from there. And I started just a side project, writing different things, never expected to have it become what it is now. And it just caught people's attention, and it grew, became more popular. The choice along the way to kind of just take a shot in the dark and try to make this work for what it was. And it was a dangerous moment for a while there, where I was wondering if I was going to be able to meet my bills. And sometimes, the moral of the story is sometimes you just got to take a shot in the dark and go for it, And then it just blossomed into foreign policy and everything else. Go pretty much anything that you're being lied to about, things that the government do. And then, here we are now, where I'm doing my daily show talking about whatever I think is important. And as you said, we brought on Whitney Webb, which is a huge, huge boon for this outlet in general, because her work is fantastic. And so, just search The Last American Vagabond anywhere, and you
do a very good job. It's very, very thorough, and I like the way that you present the information. So I guess the thing I'll mention here, just for my listeners, is you said you had things got off the ground, you didn't expect it to get this good, and then all of a sudden YouTube demonetized you, or FascistTube demonetized you a couple weeks ago, right? They things are starting to pick up, and they just trying to make ends meet. Nope, we're not going to let that happen.
Yeah, during a pandemic, no less, right? But how I conducted this, because it's a small part of what was holding keeping this outlet going. A long time ago, long before I was even really had a presence on YouTube, I had the website going. Google AdSense demonetized our website. I'm not even sure why. Probably the same reason as today, but. I just said, well, screw it then. We're not going to even be reliant on Google. And that a long time ago, and I almost thanked them for that. It shifted my model into donation based. This outlet wouldn't exist if it wasn't for donations. And that's easily 90% of what keeps this platform running. So Google pulled their basically non-existent monetization. The reason they did it is because we were getting a surge in the memberships and the super chats, because we hadn't really had that focus before, and suddenly people were really finding a way around their control, and they noticed it and pulled the plug. As well as, I believe, Jason Burmis and We Are Change, and I think it was Lift the Veil, I think was one of them. There's a lot of different people out there that are being demonetized right now, and it's crazy. And the point being is they want to control the message and everything. But for all those out there, don't worry, Last American Vagabond's not going anywhere unless you decide to stop, donating. Bottom line.
Right, and yeah, I've mentioned on the past streams, especially after what was simulated in Event 201. I still have a monetized YouTube channel, and I mean, we've talked about. I mean, I don't do any of a lot of YouTubers will change, not call it coronavirus, but call it something else to beat the algorithms. I don't do a monetized YouTube channel, but I have a really small YouTube channel. Don't make much off it at all. But I think it really is. I think it really comes down to when you start seeing success, they want to cut you as soon as they possibly can. So. I don't know. It's not surprising.
If I could note on real quick
sure, go for it.
On the self-censorship, just real quick, because that's such an, and I no way want to knock anybody out there who is choosing to try to do that to circumvent their control. I totally get it, and we all see why that needs to be done to some degree, because those people circumventing it with code words and whatever else are finding ways to get the information to people, which is great. But the problem for me, just as like a root moral, let do that. I refuse to self-censor, because ultimately that's also what they want. And then it becomes a battle on who's smart enough to dig into everything. And I think today we can see that people are being dumbed down. So they want it to be harder to find. And I refuse to self-censor. So anyone out there still, having the courage to force in these, even 5G or coronavirus, I commend you for doing so, because it's a hard time to do it.
Right. Yeah, it definitely is. It definitely is. So I guess let's do it here. Again, in that episode that I mentioned, I'll definitely link it in the show notes. But you start with talking about the 1918 Spanish flu. So honestly, I've never done any research into it, because I've never had a reason to. It's not something that I'd heard about it, in the past. But bunch of people got the flu. Like, why would I look back into that? So I guess could you tell us a bit about that, the parallels with today's alleged pandemic, and then also the U.S. military connection as well?
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic for so many different reasons. Even just the one that you just brought up that kind of made me think about this, that how interesting it is that even those of us are being lied to. Like those of us that are, that fancy ourselves woke, and that we realize that mainstream media is tricking you, that we will still not realize that we have minds that we just kind of have cemented as just a foregone conclusion. That cannabis is what comes to mind for me in the same way, that people that will realize that all of that, being proper, there's politics involved, will still then simultaneously be like, oh, it makes you stupider, or it, the things that have been dispelled over the years, but they don't even realize it because you've just taken it at face value, such as the idea that, that just the Spanish flu, right? I'm the same way, that why would you question it? Because that's something we were all taught. But we need to start challenging all of these classically held ideas, because these days I'm finding out, what aren't we lied to about? That's the sad reality. And that goes far beyond just this one country. There's governments lie, but the story is so important. And the research that I was really digging into that I recommend you guys all check out was that of Gareth Porter. Really fantastic researcher, journalist, does amazing work. And one of the articles I was talking about on that specific episode was one where he outlines just the general story, which I recommend for everybody. And, we hear Spanish flu. 1918, that we came from Spain. And this is one of the main reasons, in fact, historically speaking, looking back, that they no longer do that. They actually make a point to no longer base it off a location or a person, because they know that that's historically almost always inaccurate. And that's interesting why it should say something why we have governments trying to force it in today. Think about that. But the long or the short of it is that it started in the United States. And this is not debatable. This is not a theory or a conspiracy theory. There's abundant documentary evidence that shows that the 1918 pandemic started in Haskell County, Kansas. And interestingly enough, then spread through the U.S. military during World War I and just continued to spread on the field because they knew about it. Because General Pershing at the time was aware, as well as the administration at the time was aware. They knew that there was something going on. They're obviously their knowledge of what the viruses were, even a different discussion to how we're lost on that today as well. But it was limited back then, even as we see it today, right? So, but they still understood there was a problem, and they still understood that this was making people sick, and they continued to put people in harm's way. They continued to send in troops and pull back the sick ones over and over, which now we know, historically speaking, and even into today, that made it worse. right? It mutated, it caused problems, it was just spreading uncontrollably, and that it made it worse to where it spread back in the United States, and the rest, as I say, is history, even though we don't know it. The reason that it went down in Spain is because Spain, the Spanish government, was the only government at the time that was being honest about it. Isn't that just a perfect analogy for today? Kind of sort of a nice guys finish last scenario. They're the only ones that were saying, yeah, here we have some cases and we're dealing with it. The UK, the United States, they all knew they had it and they all lied about it. So it went down as the Spanish flu, and there's so much more in this story, but that's the gist of it. We have to realize that it's just like we're dealing with today, that the U.S. military with the, 4 now aircraft carriers that they're forcing out are all sick, full of sick COVID-19 patients. So again, they're choosing to put their agendas, their military goals above that of safety for the world, and in particular, as they're the military of this country, the American people. They're putting your lives at risk to achieve their goals. It might as well be the same situation today.
Right. And since we're talking about it, I think we should go ahead and cover that as well with what what the U.S. government is doing with militarily and foreign policy wise, because the gears of war are continuing. Right. I'm pretty sure sanctions haven't been lifted. I'm pretty sure everything's still it was full throttle before it. It might be even it might be 110% on the pedal now. So could you tell us a little bit more about what the U.S. military is up to around the world?
Oh yeah. And then just one last point on the Spanish flu. I think
Sure.
it's important people to recognize, just to kind of one good thing to take away from that, understand not just that it didn't start in Spain, but started in the United States and they lied about that, but the fact that the all said and done, when this was all over, more people were killed by the disease than by war on every angle of this. In every field of war they were involved in, more Americans died from the disease that they knowingly put them in the path of than the actual war that they were fighting. Think about how that should be a really sober, sombering moment for people out there, but it was hidden from everybody, and we don't know, and that's a perfect segue into the foreign policy in the same way that we have to realize that that's all happening right now. They're continuing these foreign policy agendas, even while seemingly the whole world, even those that classically support U.S. agendas, are backing away and saying, no, maybe we shouldn't use starvation sanctions against countries in the middle of a pandemic. But the U.S. government is twisting the knife in every possible field of war. They're continuing to bomb people in Somalia right now. I just reported on that. They're continuing to carry out agendas in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria, all these locations. I mean, some of the most important ones are Venezuela. They have now multiple ships going to Venezuela. They're actually carrying out a massive so-called narco operation, which is really insulting to the average person's intelligence when you realize that Colombia, which is the government which they're working with to go after Venezuela, sells 70% of the world's cocaine.
Right.
Yet they're going after Venezuela for narco trafficking of cocaine. It's just it's disjointed. It doesn't make any sense if you just have the information in front of you, And there's so many things we can get into if you feel, let me know where you want to get into in foreign policy, but it doesn't.
Right. There's a lot going on, and I mean, and this has been a big frustration for me, especially like foreign policy is just one thing that really gets under my skin, because it's really the most evil, in my opinion, the most evil aspect of the state, the most despicable, and yeah, the fact that it's full speed ahead with the sanctions in Yemen and all these and all of these other things. Well, this is going on. It's certainly frustrating. So I guess
Yemen for me is a big one. Yemen is one that really gets under my skin. Like that's something like personally, like it's hard. I have to like constantly check my emotions with that topic because it's so despicable to see so many people willfully starving. The people are intentionally creating a humanitarian crisis. Then it's being called the world's worst humanitarian crisis. And then they continue to sell weapons and continue to bomb and continue to blockade. And even now it's even worse. Same thing with Gaza. It's all just continuing on. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's definitely insane. So, was there anything else you wanted to mention the Spanish flu and its relevance or connection to today?
Well, just again for people to think about how relevant that really is, and ask the question if they were lying then or are they lying now, right? I mean, we always have to ask that. Yes, we have different people in different places, but the general policy, both foreign and domestic, has been pretty damn spot on. No matter left, right, up, down, no matter who's in charge, we have to see that. And if they did it then, have to be willing to consider if they're doing it now, whether that's in regard to lying about that happening or in testing bioweapons, which they've done numerous times in the past.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, indeed, indeed. So yeah, like as I mentioned in the introduction, now that we're on to the, I guess, back in the time machine, we're back to present time. We're not back in 1918. Like I said, I want to start with, I guess, the pre-existing conditions. I guess that aspect of it first. So pre-existing conditions and iatrogenic death would be kind of the first thing. And this was when I first started following this, even in following what's happening in Italy. That was what I guess that was my initial inclination, because I've been doing for the past year a lot of research into health, and so learning about how over 50% of Americans especially, and a lot of just the West in general, have chronic metabolic disease, and it leads to heart disease and all of these things that like it makes weakens immune systems. It does all of these things. So that was my initial inclination when I was watching this. Then the data was coming out of Italy with all the pre-existing conditions and the age. And then for New York, for the data coming out of New York, hearing about how the intubation was the standard of care, like within the first 24 hours, and how 80%, I think it was 80% of the patients put on intubators never got off of them. It's basically a death sentence. And then the further information I found out yesterday was that apparently Medicaid was $13,000 per COVID patient, $39,000 per patient if they get put on a ventilator. So like this is just twisted in so many directions. We obviously can't trust the data coming out of anywhere, whether it's China, whether it's the U.S. Doesn't matter. We can't really trust the data coming out of anywhere. Then you hear about all of these, and this is nothing new with big pharma, right? With the financial conflicts of interest, all of these really unethical things. It's not surprising at all. So I guess from your vantage point here, what's been your take on I guess on the numbers, on maybe the severity of this flu? Could you kind of speak to that?
Yeah. I mean, it's such a broad topic. There's so many things just to get into.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think just want to touch on one thing you mentioned there is just anytime there's a profit motive, whether we're talking for-profit prisons or anything else, you can guarantee that will play a factor. Whether this is just a good-hearted person that is, finds himself in a position where both things are helping people, but they choose the one that ultimately helps them a little more, right? Whether it's innocuous or not, the profit motive will drive the direction. And so we're talking about that right now. That there are people that, even in regard to intubating, when knowing that this is causing more deaths, which, by the way, doesn't make any real sense based on what we understand of, previous situations. But so most people are dying, and yet we're doing it anyway because possibly they're making more money at the end of the day. And their classic understanding is thinking that intubation is going to help, right? But they can't stop in the middle and go, well, right, 80% of people are dying when we do it, but we get 30 grand more when we have them on an intubator. So you can, or on a ventilator, so you can see that there's something that's driving that. And this is what we have to ask ourselves. And I think it's very broad. I think you could make an explanation for either side of the argument, where you can argue that there are possible ways that just our own broken system has created the kind of pandemonium around what might already have been happening, maybe just a little more severe, maybe even with the introduction of something new that's not that dangerous, but because of the way that it's being addressed. And people are just acting, and then you could see how they could use the deaths that already happened, the hundreds of thousands of pneumonia deaths and the flu deaths and all these things that are already happening. 50,000 deaths a year, from flu alone. And we're at a point now where you could maybe we're just looking at those numbers. And I'm not saying I think that. I'm just saying you could make that argument for how you could see that. Now, on the other side, you could argue that this is something that's being driven by the profit entirely. There are people that are intentionally hyping this up in order to make more profit. Right. And then there's also the discussion of whether or not any of it's actually accurate, which I think is crazy that we're not even allowed to ask these questions today, coming from a government that has absolutely manufactured entire events, historically verified. Yet we're not allowed to ask whether or not this might be to some degree a lie. That's crazy today. But at the end of the day, we can see that there's always that possibility. And I think nobody knows. I don't think anybody at this point actually knows what's going on. That's why I'm cautioning people out there. Don't get swept up by somebody who swears they have the answer. Listen to them, sure, entertain the information, but be a discerning adult and ask yourself, does he know for sure? Or is he saying he knows someone that knows for sure? Or I have a source that says, right? We need to be skeptical today, and this is government-driven agendas around it all are really where this is all focused on for me right now. I think, and we can get into the discussion of the evidence around it, but I think most of it seems to be pointing toward some kind of a bioweapon discussion. seeing as how both the Chinese and the U.S. government have been manipulating and using bio research to make weapons, and then the vaccines from them. It's obviously about the weapons. They claim it's about the vaccines, but why would you need a vaccine for a weapon that hasn't been used yet or not
Right.
in the world yet, right? But that's where the evidence seems to point to me, and I think that that's something we need to be able to consider. But who knows?
Right. Right. Yeah, I'm right there with you, and I'll make just one final point on I guess just what we've been seeing happening. But yeah, like with the and obviously that could, I mean, that is, I mean, to me, like that's I guess that's the Occam's razor explanation for me, is just that that's whether there's a flu or not, or whether COVID-19 is real or not. Point is, these people with weakened immune systems are going to end up in the hospital and dying more. That's and as I said in previous streams, I mean, the rates of obesity are going up; they aren't going down. People are getting more unhealthy; they're not getting healthier. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do see in the coming years these sorts of rates go up. But yeah, anyway, I suppose, yeah, we can go ahead and get on to, I guess, another another thing here that I guess I really hadn't looked into at all. And you mentioned with with the Spanish flu, like I've never had any real reason to look back into it. Well, that's how the I guess the 2001 the dark winter anthrax. That's how that was for me too. And 9/11 was the event that woke me up. I just never went but I was like 17 or 18, and that was long after 9/11 by that time. So I never went back and looked at it, and sure enough, wow, there it is. So I guess. There's that connection. There's the I guess the dark winter connection. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think that I'm actually going to be doing one of my next shows kind of focused on this topic in general, and some of Whitney Webb's research and the larger concern that this is presenting. And
Right.
The history around anthrax and how that went. This is what something you're probably mentioning there is that people aren't aware that this kind of blew up in their face. The argument was that, and the anthrax was, we all have the images of them, all the different times they stood up and lied about what we were, even in regard to WMDs in Iraq, right? Those things we now know are lies, that they not just lied, but they knowingly lied to Americans, which is crazy that something like that can happen. And yet here we are today, and seemingly not even considering that fact. In regard to anthrax, it went the exact same way. They lied. They said it was Saddam Hussein. They said it was, despite the fact that, by the way, they had already been giving this person all kinds of things, the Iraq-Iran war, right? They gave them biological weapons. They gave them chemical weapons, right? And then suddenly when Iraq became or Saddam Hussein became the bad guy, when they no longer had use for him, right now we have concerns about the things that he's using, right? And they just lied. They said it was Saddam Hussein. We now know, looking back on the history and their own information, that it was, so they tell us anyway, a disgruntled employee from Fort Detrick that released these things and gave them to people. Both the two congressmen who had issues with this were both the only two people that were holding up the Patriot Act. Surprise, surprise.
That's the
After
craziest thing. Yeah, they were the ones that got the anthrax mailed to them. Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then of course after that, well, guess what? The Patriot Act passed, right? So now we, and this was all this was a false flag. This was and we know this now, right? They just try to pass it off on one guy, and it's a coincidence that it happened to go only to the two people. It just doesn't make any sense. Right. So we're dealing with this. And by the way, they also had all kinds of exercises, and that's what Dark Winter was about. Right. People like Robert Cadleck and these people that were involved, Jerome Hauer, that ultimately created it was the Event 201 of the anthrax story for those that are following coronavirus. It's exactly the same thing. They laid it out in explicit detail. And then it's ultimately what happened. Of course, in the exercise, it was to blame Saddam Hussein. And that's obviously where they were meant to go. It just blew up in their face. Right. And this is the same government we're talking about today, guys, with, by the way, the same people involved. That's what's so crazy to me. The same people involved in lying to the American people about the anthrax scare. And then, by the way, who are invested in the very companies that were set to profit wildly from the vaccines they then forced on everybody, which then ultimately hurt a lot of people. But that's a different story. Those same people are right now tied up in Trump's administration dealing with coronavirus. And surprise, surprise, they're set to make a whole bunch of profit from the treatments to coronavirus. You can't overlook these obvious tie-ins, and if they were lying back then to make profit, gee, do you think they would do it now? It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is, and that was the craziest thing about looking back into the anthrax thing, and I'm going to reemphasize this for the listeners because I re-listened to this episode twice. I think it was one of Whitney's interviews on a different podcast. But anyway, yeah, the senators that got anthrax mailed to them were the ones that were not allowing the Patriot Act to go through. Just think about that, and then also consider that weren't Dick Cheney and other people in the administration taking Cipro, an antibiotic for anthrax,
Yeah,
before it was even
and
mailed.
that. Yeah, and I believe that was, if I believe it's Jerome Howard was the person that ultimately was driving that, and person that was stood to basically told these people that this was needed before we even knew that this was happening. So the story goes, right? We could document it that this was being warned to take this before the anthrax scare had even begun. Right. And then, of course, it comes full circle when you realize that they're also profiting from the things that they're talking about. It goes full circle. I highly recommend that you read her entire work on the Dark Winter episode, which is part of the Engineering Contagion series. It's all on the Last American Vagabond. But there's just I'm going to do my best to probably today or tomorrow encompass all of that data, as well as one she just wrote about Kushner's surveillance system tied up with the whole thing, or the Kushner-backed surveillance system using 9/11-like stuff around coronavirus, which is horrifying. But I'm going to try to encompass all that in one of my next shows. But the best thing to do is to read the entire article. You just can't get all the information in there.
Right. Yeah. I went ahead and put a link to that in the live chat for the listeners, and yeah, for those that are here, definitely if you got any questions or comments, please feel free to leave those in the live chat. But yeah, let's go ahead and so the Fort Detrick is relevant to this story too, isn't it? So 2001. Was I guess that was the anthrax that I guess it originated from Fort Detrick. Where does Fort Detrick fit into this story? And I think there's a mysterious vaping illness that comes around too, right? Could you speak to that?
Right, right. Yeah, and this, on the in the what you were talking about before, this would be one of those discussions that is based on hype. This is not a verifiable thing yet. There's a lot of evidence and data points, but this is not proof that shows that these things are necessarily tied. But I think, and you want my honest opinion, I think this is absolutely connected based on all the information. And what we're talking about here is, first of all, Fort Detrick, for people that don't know, is a BSL-4 lab, just like the one in Wuhan that they act like is the only thing that ever worked on coronavirus in bats, right? DARPA and Fort Detrick have been working on coronavirus in bats for decades. Open information, right? In fact, there's obvious ties to Fort Detrick. Fort Detrick and North Carolina University and the Pentagon itself, they all have a presence in Wuhan lab. Just so people know that. So even the discussion that it came from there does not automatically just remove any possible faults with the U.S. government. That'd be the first place that they would do it. And I'm still considering that China is responsible and everything else too, right? But the other way around, there is no no Chinese presence in Fort Detrick. I find that to be very important to point out, right? So Fort Detrick on the East Coast is a lab that is notorious for having contamination issues, for containment issues, for having things leak out of the lab, things like Ebola or coronavirus, things in the past that they've actually been caught in, like things that the CDC actually shut them down for. I just recently showed a clip of all these people around Fort Detrick back in 2016. All the families that live in the area are all saying that they know they're being poisoned, they're being tested on. We all have cancer, and just no one cares. Everyone ignores it. All right. So, but into 2019, there was this CDC shuts down Fort Detrick because they have containment issues, it means what it sounds like, that they had something leaked out of the lab. They have issues. They have safety issues in regard to their highly contagious diseases that they work on. Right. That's not the first time. Multiple times this place has had exact same issues. So it closes down. CDC, for no reason at all, basically national security, reopens it. They couldn't even tell you what happened or why it went down the way it did, quoting national security. Then, as the months go on, I think like a month later, give or take a few days, you have mysterious vaping illnesses that start breaking out, or rather start getting to the apex right around this period. And this is the mysterious vaping illnesses that we all heard about in this country.
Oh, yeah.
No one ever explained it. They tried to pass it off as THC cartridges, but that was never verified. Guess what? For those that don't know, that illness that we couldn't explain, the weird pneumonia-like, influenza-like illness, which they caused it, or they named it at the time, guess what it had? Ground glass opacity in the lungs. It had the exact same symptoms as everything we're talking about in regard to COVID-19 today. But no one's ever considered that. No one in the mainstream dares to talk about it. This is an obvious potential tie-in. Then, of course, on the other side of Fort Detrick, you have nursing homes that have these weird outbreaks and supposed cold illness. They literally called it the cold, but it had the exact same ground glass opacity in the lungs, had the exact same symptoms as the mysterious vaping illness. So right off the bat, why wouldn't they right then be like, wait a minute, we have two things that are exactly the same on different areas that are right near this area, but we're going to call them two different things. There's obviously some cover-up going on, in my opinion, right? These things all happened. People died. It got very severe. Thousands of people. No one cares, right? Then you have the perfect segue into the World Military Games over in Wuhan, which the U.S. military sent its personnel over there for the World Military Games. Wuhan and the Chinese authorities have testified, have commented on the fact that there were people that were sick that were there, military personnel that had to be put to bed. Right. So the whole point here is that we can see a very clear trail, exactly like 1918, exactly like the U.S. military trailing it around the world, just like it did from Kansas. Right. So that's something we need to consider. Now, is it proof of that happening? No. But I think the evidence is very clearly pointing in that direction. And everything else that you can get right now that's in some way pointing towards China or Wuhan or the wet market, it's circumstantial at best. And they've actually proven that it did not start in that wet market. That's long since been passed. But all the people with political opinions are forcing in that China did it. It's all because of the Communist Party, and it's all because of that wet market. And that's all they're doing. Now, I'm not saying that's not possible. I'm just saying the evidence does not point there. And if we're at all caring about the evidence and trying to be legitimate about this, then politics shouldn't matter. But clearly it does. Right? It's all we're hearing. China did it. China did it. And it's not even over yet. Right? Just like I said in the beginning, it's the reason they don't name it after the location, because it's almost always incorrect. It's just, we're just going to assume the first place that you noticed it is the place that it came from. That's just obviously naive.
Yeah. Very, very well said. So, that's definitely fascinating. And what's even more interesting is now we're seeing with media reports come out like maybe this has been here a lot longer than we thought it has. Maybe
Exactly.
maybe a bunch of the population's already been has already gotten this and recovered from it. I wonder maybe this could really be the case. So we're kind of seeing now. I don't
They
know.
censored us for saying that, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. But
When we
they
like a month ago when we
s-
first started saying that, they were like censoring
censored it
deleting videos.
when they needed to justify the lockdown, when they needed to justify taking away people's freedoms.
Yeah.
That's when they wanted to cover that up. So I just think it's really really interesting now. Like I mean, obviously obviously it's. I don't know what's going on 100%. You don't either. I mean, we're trying to figure out. We're trying our best to figure out. But I don't know. It seems like I don't know. The more I learn about it, the more it seems like it's just a big giant just excuse to push to ram through their agendas. That's really, it just seems like an excuse. And then obviously that the controlled economic collapse as well. It just seems like an excuse to me.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, I think the biggest issue with all of this really is, I mean, again, like I said before, whether we're talking about whether you think this is real, fake, whatever your theory is around what's happening here, I think we all have to acknowledge that what they're doing is using the chaos and the fear to force in all the things they've always been trying to force in. I mean, and this couldn't be any clearer. I mean, again, real, fake, or otherwise, do we really need the Defense Production Act? Do we really need defense martial law that's never going to really go away? Do we really need a $2.2 trillion stimulus package plus 4 from the Fed plus more stimulus packages coming over the top so we can all get $1,000 check? Right? This is obviously not right. And everywhere else in the world is showing us that right now. And yet Americans seemingly cannot pull themselves out of the two-party illusion long enough to recognize that we're being the wool's being pulled. We are being tricked as we speak. Again, real or not, we are being tricked. That has to settle in for people. Just like 9/11, we never got those things back. No, I mean, honest people can look at, even people that once were on the side of it can look at 9/11, the Patriot Act, and we all have to acknowledge that was one of the most catastrophic things that ever happened for the U.S. Constitution. We never came back from that. Now this is the last nail in the coffin, in my opinion. We need to fight this.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I certainly agree. So let me take a quick look at chat and see if we've got any questions there. So someone said, and this was from a little bit ago, self-censorship is real with the statists. You can't hit them with all kind. You can hit them with all kinds of thought. You can't hit them with all kinds of thought crime at the same time. Richard, people are just allergic to the truth. Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, unfortunately, and and this is something I've noticed even just from being in the alternative media, for a handful of years or so, is just that a lot of people don't have any motivation or desire to look into the truth. I mean, it's
Yeah.
crazy. Like I can't even imagine just living a life where, this box or this, this square box on my wall tells me everything that I need to do and everything I need to think, or this thing in my pocket that feeds me the news that it wants to feed me through algorithms. Like to have that, just to have that. I can't imagine it. It's crazy. I just can't imagine it.
Yeah,
And there's no
it
question
brings to
there, but
mind one. No, no, it brings to mind an interesting interview. I don't remember if this was Eric Schmidt or this was somebody in regard to Google, and I don't think that was the right name, but one of the higher ups. And they point, and you probably remember this. They asked him, what is, I forget what the exact question was actually, but it was something about the search results and what they're striving to do. And he said, well, look, he said, if you search for something and you get more than one result, then we're failing. And I thought that, to the average person thinking, oh, well, that's interesting. So they were going to fine tune it down to so what are they saying? Are they saying that they are going to know what you're asking for? Or are they saying that they want to be able to know what they should be presenting to you if you ask a certain question? Right. So the idea that they are only ever going to present to you one thing when you ask a question, and that's the idea of success, that's pretty horrifying. And we need to realize what they're saying there, that's what they want. They want a world where you only get one answer. Right? That you don't have the possibility to think for yourself and come to your own conclusions. You just get what the government tells you. That's it. Right? That's their envision of success. And we have to be aware of that. That's pretty scary.
Yeah, it definitely is. It definitely is, and I guess just for this more general picture. I mean, obviously, I mean, you mentioned the medical martial law, and one of the craziest things to me is, obviously, it's not surprising to see, like Bill Gates and the World Health Organization, CDC, push vaccines. Like that's not really surprising, but to see, like doctors that I follow on Twitter, or people like that talking about a vaccine, how like it'd be really good, really good if they could, if these elites could come up with one so that we could come up with have this immunity. Well, what's just crazy to me is that they say it could take 18 months for a vaccine, a long time. They're already working on it. Rest assured, they're putting a bunch of money. Bill Gates especially is putting a ton of money into funding this research. Well, we're even from mainstream media, they're learning new things about this every single day. So how can they come up? How are they even? I don't know. I mean, it seems like they're still trying to figure out what exactly is going on, right? Now, obviously, we know there might be another agenda there, right? Yes, we know there's a different agenda there. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I bring back to the same point with the vaccines and anthrax, right? I mean, again, even more relevant, this is the same people. The same people, Emergent Biosolutions, is one of the main groups. These are the same people tied in with the same lies from before that are now working on this right now, right? So remember, think about what happened with anthrax, right? They forced in a treatment fast under the guise of fear without going through, I doubt they ever really go through the right safety precautions anyway, but they force it through. They then mandate that it must be given to American soldiers. Upwards of 80% of those people had massive side effects, headaches that never went away for the rest of their life. Some of them debilitating stuff that they never got over for the rest of their life. And after that happened, after they had whistleblowers and people that said, you are hurting these people, the very same people that they mindlessly sent in to fight during 1918, right? Sure shows you how much they really care about these people. But even after the whistleblowers and different people and doctors spoke out, they still forced it in. Right? They still made sure this happened. Then, of course, when the actual scare happened, well, then fear, and they just pushed it in anyway. So even knowing that it was having these effects, both the government and the people behind the financial aspects of it didn't care. These are the same people, guys. This was not that long ago. This is 2001. People, we need to see what's possible. And these are the same people then. They're doing it again now, at least possibly. And we're not allowed to ask that question. The mainstream media is telling us we can't challenge official events. We can't question authoritative sources. That's why we need to be able to. Man, that just scares me that we can even have this discussion. It's even up in the air that we won't be able to ask these questions.
Yeah, it definitely is, and this entire situation caught me by surprise. Like I'm sure it caught a lot of people by surprise. I mean, obviously America, I hadn't obviously I'm a free market anarchist. I haven't viewed America as a land of the free since don't really think ever. But and it's obviously not getting any better, and especially after these after what's transpired over the past few months. What little freedoms were left are now gone. And I mean, hell, the First Amendment's suspended. I put this up on I put this up on a fascist post a couple days ago. But Easter Sunday gatherings, they were illegal. Like, it was a agorist activity. It was black gray market activity because it was illegal. Like, you could not have an Easter get together of more than 8 people or whatever. That's crazy. That is honestly crazy.
Protests.
Yeah.
Protests, right? Think about that. Like the point you made. Protest, even if people, to the guise of virus, of course, it's because virus and we're in danger. That's their argument. But you're literally saying because of whatever excuse, fill in the blank, you no longer are able to execute your First Amendment right. That's never a possibility that we should be in. Period. Right. There's never an excuse. There's not something you can put in that box that then can be followed by, so you don't have this right. That doesn't happen. That's the point. These people are being treasonous right now. That's where we are. You mentioned the medical martial law. I mean, that's horrifying. Some of these things we're seeing. People being grown men being forced to the ground and forcefully injected or taken blood, even as they refuse because they felt that the doctor deemed them no longer medically fit to make their own decisions. That just happened because the guy didn't think this was actually happening. You can't have your own opinion today, otherwise you're going to be medically forcefully treated. I mean, that's so crazy. We can't allow this country to be that. It is that right now. Once again, we need to fight if we want this to change.
Yeah. I mean, the only way they're going to stop is if people resist, and I mean, it's just kind of have to see, what point will that be for? And I mentioned this on last night's stream. I mean, I don't know what that line in that so-called proverbial line in the sand is for Americans anymore. I don't know. I hope it's almost there. I hope we've almost hit that point, and I hope that things start to the course starts to reverse. I hope it does. I hope it does. But I know we've got a time window here, so go ahead and kind of wrap up there. Do you have anything else you wanted to get out on that we didn't cover on the subject so far, or the Spanish flu, or anything of the sort?
Yeah, maybe we should, I'm happy to come back again in the near future and do it again. There's just so much, there's so many things I could throw in there. There's so much information. I just recommend you check out my videos from the channel and dive into all the data and look at it, read it, understand it. But just to end on the note that you made there, the line in the sand. I mean, you want my honest opinion, as I'm sure you do. We're past that. Right? That line the line for me, Derek Rose made this very clear when I talked to him on my show that, that line was crossed the moment that they no longer really abided by your constitutional rights, the moment that they were forcing people medical treatment. I mean, look, these lines were crossed a long time ago when they started even discussing that these things could be discussed, right? The idea that constitutional rights can just be ignored or removed or voted out is just ridiculous, right? But we have to recognize whatever that line was crossed or wherever you thought it was crossed, we're past it. Yeah. We are past it. What we're doing right now is not indicative of what we're told this country is. Bottom line. I'm trying to tell people before, inherent, God-given, those things mean something, right? These things they can't just be discussed. And even if you have every single member of Congress get together and vote and decide that the Second Amendment is no longer valid, that doesn't mean anything. These things are inherent rights. Anything else that's happened since then that were discussions or amending different things that didn't apply to the Bill of Rights is a different discussion. We're talking about your amendments, the God-given inherent rights that the founding fathers didn't give anybody. The government didn't give these things to people. They simply wrote down things that they're acknowledging that all human beings have. Excuse me. But all human beings have. And that's such an important thing to think about. Mm-hmm. These things are there. They're inherent. You have them. Endowed by your creator. Shall not be infringed. We have to understand what these mean. No matter who is in power or what they say, or no matter what everybody else gets together and gets razzed up by some kind of political movement or statement, we have to see that these things cannot be taken away. And the moment that they start to suggest that or do it like they're doing right now, we're past that line. We're past it. Time to take action.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, Ryan, I certainly appreciate you coming on to chat. It was a great conversation. We'll have to get you back on. The website's LastAmericanVagabond.com. Is there anything else you'd like to plug?
Just thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. You can just check out the daily wrap up. Whitney Webb's series, part 3 is coming out probably in the next week or so. So keep an eye out for that. Thanks for having me on.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ryan. You have a great rest of your day. All right, and for the rest of you guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Certainly hope you enjoyed that discussion. Yeah, as I said, fascinating stuff. And I'll pull it up here on screen. But yeah, make sure to check out. Yeah, here I've got on screen. This is Whitney's category. Make sure to check out all of her articles. Looks like there's a handful of them up right now, and I actually just found out about the last couple that are up there today. So I'm going to be reading those as soon as I finish this up. So LastAmericanVagabond.com is the website. Please do go check that out. Beyond anything else, really. I mean, if someone only wants to take like an hour or two to get up to date on what's going on, I would say, print them out, these handful of articles, and give them to them. Maybe that wouldn't be best for everybody,